As I mentioned in the previous video, the Gothic style is pretty unique in that we know quite a bit about the origins of the style and can pinpoint the place and time in which it started. We can attribute the beginnings of the Gothic style to a man named Abbot Suger, who presided over the Church of Saint Denis on the Ile de Paris, which was a region that was at the time sort of on the outskirts of Paris. He was the advisor to Louis the Sixth and Seventh, and he presided over a Benedictine monastery called Saint Denis. And he wanted to inflate the importance of this Benedictine monastery by making it symbolic of the French monarchy, which was increasing in power and significance at this time. Saint Denis was significant as the burial place of Saint Denis, who was the patron saint of Paris, and known as the first bishop of Paris. It was also the burial place of French kings, so it was connected to the monarchy as well. So it was a place of political importance, both from the church and through the monarchy. Abbot Suger embarked on a rebuild of the parts of the churches, particularly the narthex and the ambulatory, based on ancient writings. And he was a scholar and loved writing about his plans for the renovations of Saint Denis. So we have a good deal of information from his writings about what he intended to do and his justifications for doing them. And he based his justifications on ideas about mathematical harmony that go back to Platonic thinking. And so he very much was interested in the numerical symbolism of the building. He was also very interested in the symbolic importance of light. And I've mentioned this before. Throughout the Gothic period, the introduction of light into the interior was not just about the architecture, but really about the symbolism of what happens when you move into the church surroundings, leaving behind the exterior material world and moving into a sort of transcendent place that represents paradise. And so we see that light becomes a very important part of the Gothic style, thanks to Abbot Suger. As I mentioned earlier, one of the places that he renovated was the ambulatory and the radiating chapels around the choir in the Abbey Church of Saint Denis. And if we look at this space, you can see that it is flooded with light from these windows that are surrounding the ambulatory. In places in which a Romanesque church would be very dark, he has now found a way through heightening the ceilings to allow in lots of exterior light. And if we look at the ceiling of this ambulatory with the crossed ribbed vaulting, we see that the arches, which in a Romanesque church would be rounded, are now culminating at a narrowed point, which gives results in a pointed arch. But if we look at the earlier slide, it also allows for greater height and kind of a soaring ceiling, which gives the impression of more height and a lot of airiness and openness in a space, again, that in a Romanesque church would have felt very dark and claustrophobic. And again, the main purpose of this is to lighten up the walls and make room for windows. As I mentioned before, stained glass is a major element in the effect of the interior of Gothic churches. And this has to do with a new image of God. God is seen as light, and light is miraculous. It passes through the windows and is transformed into jewel-like colors by the glass. And this beauty on earth leads to a contemplation of beauty of God. And this is really the justification for making things seem so ornate and overly decorative, is this idea that a space like this needs to be ornate in order to inspire worship. The church then becomes the city of God on earth and transforms the material world into the splendor of paradise. Abbot Suger's renovations to Saint-Denis were completed over a century, and we see that it resulted in two towers, two very tall towers, which is one of the characteristics of a Gothic church, although this tower here was removed in the 19th century after lightning struck the North Tower and damaged it. We also see the introduction of a rose window, another characteristic of a Gothic church. And although the portals are rounded, we see three of them, inviting more and more people into this church. You'll notice it also is in, although a urban setting, although at the time this was a rather remote part of Paris, or rather on the outskirts of Paris. Abbot Suger, it should be noted, was politically motivated in his renovations of the church. He was French and loyal to French kings, and nationalism becomes in a way more important than the connection to the papacy. There's a desire of the French king to distinguish himself visually, and the Gothic becomes a royal style. It's associated with France and with French kingship, although eventually it spreads everywhere in Europe.